All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the breakout session, Tech Hustle, Unmasking Imposters by Debugging Doubts, hosted by Bobby Dorlis. So excited to have you join us today. I'm going to share a couple quick reminders before I introduce Bobby. One, please utilize the chat to have conversations and share your thoughts during the session. You can also share questions via the Q&A tab, and our team will be monitoring the chat. There'll be an opportunity to come up towards the end to ask your questions live on stage. We'll also try to answer some questions live during the session. Your feedback is very important to us. So following the session, we ask that you complete the brief feedback survey. And the link for that will be shared in the chat. And with those reminders out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Bobby Dorlis. Bobby is a seasoned engineer and motivational speaker with over 20 years of experience in technology and engineering, particularly in specializing in the practices of site reliability engineering with an emphasis on hyperscale distributed infrastructure. Bobby is known for his outgoingness and his historical knowledge of Twitter's tech and D&I journey, where he worked for 9 years, becoming one of only a few Black engineers to achieve the title of staff engineer. Bobby supports students at CodePath as a technical interview career coach and runs his own business, The Tech Hustle, where he mentors, coaches, and teaches the next generation about tech and the value of diverse perspectives. So show some love in the chat, drop some emojis to welcome Bobby on stage.
Wow, I'm gonna have a good time. I got a switchboard here so I can play around with a few buttons, so hopefully I don't annoy you all too much. I might have some music playing in the background too. We're gonna have a really cool time in this breakout session. Again, my name is Bobby Dorlis, but my friends call me Bobby D. And today, I'm not your normal coach here at CodePath. I'm really gonna reflect some of my experience as an engineer, especially teaching the next generation how to get over some of the challenges you may have with imposter syndromes, but also teaching you a new method that we'd introduced working at a really cool place where where the team itself created a more inclusive environment for you all. Now I'm going to take my eyes off the camera just for a little bit to start presenting and get my slide deck real quick. So don't think that I'm not paying attention to you all. I hope you all are having a blast here at the EES Emerging Engineering Summit. And it looks like my slides should be sharing up. Yep, and it's coming through. So I hope you're enjoying yourself. I hope you're having a great time. But this breakout session, we're really going to dive into some technical concepts and also really enlighten you on how to be yourself in an environment. But like I said, teach you how teams can create an inclusive environment. So I created this talk called Unmasking Imposters by Debugging Doubt. We're basically empowering super agents, engineers at scale. Now, a little sidebar before I get into the talk is that I did this presentation a few months ago overseas in London. And I will say that it was well received because the concept that we're talking about is really revolutionizing how we work in an environment where we can all feel like we're part of the crew. Now, the reason why I say part of the crew is that I asked my son to kind of help me out, come up with an idea for this talk when I was first drafting it. And he said, "Yo, why don't you write the talk and use imposters as a part of the talk?" So hopefully I keep up to what he, suggested in terms of using imposters or using Among Us. Ooh, shoes. Using Among Us to actually kind of describe the situation, how comfortable I want you to feel. Because if you haven't played this game before, it was really popping during COVID time. Obviously, the younger crowd, and that might be part of you, y'all too. But more or less, played this game where you're in a group identifying who is the imposter. But I'm going to change the perspective. All right. But before we jump right in, I want to give you a quick little more introduction about me because some of you may have had a chance to come and talk to me in one-on-ones, and/or if you haven't already, find me on LinkedIn. It's easy. I have some links at the end, and definitely someone can throw it in the chat room because I definitely want to connect. So I am the founder, CEO of a community called the Tech Hustle, where we're really striving to teaching the next generation how they can excel in the field of engineering by telling my stories and also a few of my guys that I ride with in terms of members of the Tech Hustle, where we're talking about our journey in tech. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit backstory about me because I got a few minutes before we can really, run out of time per se and stick to the talk. But I want to give you some context about who I am. I don't really have a slide deck on it, so I'm just going to go off the top of the head and see how far I can go, at least quickly as possible, because we got to get back to the slide. But in general, a little bit more about my background. So I'm a first generation Haitian American. I was born in Maryland, but I was raised and grew up down South Florida. Like I said, I'm a first generation Haitian American, so my heritage and my family come from Haiti. It's something I'm very proud of, and definitely want to make sure that if you are first generation, when you hear where I started from, just know you can achieve anything. In terms of my background and schooling wise, I didn't go to a 4 year college. I only went to a 2 year technical school, leveled up, and just kept going. Certifications were my mechanism for me to get into the industry. And I started at the help desk, was my first entry point. If you caught the keynote speech earlier today, I was telling Sheena Allen that I remember when I made my first, paycheck and I was starting to pay bills at my mom and dad's house, right? It's like that first job that I've ever had was working at the help desk. Now, over the years, I developed some skill sets around systems engineering, which is where my proficiency is the most. And we're going to talk about where systems engineering comes into play and the roles that I've worked in the past. But I've also learned how to become a software engineer because automating myself out of a job is something I have always taught as a mantra to my mentees, and definitely you'll see some concepts around it while we're talking through our unmasking imposters. Now, the skill sets that we're going to cover today, specifically around site reliability engineering. If you're not familiar with it, take some time, write it down. It's quick to find it online. It's SRE is the acronym, and you can definitely find really great articles about it. And you might actually find an article that I'm in because I'm always out there talking about this skill set. But that tells you a little bit of more or less where I started from, a little bit about my growth. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself because I really want to jump into the topic at hand here. But before we jump into the topic, I want to articulate a little bit more about what my skills were working at this really cool social media company. Now, if you don't know, and I heard Dana mention it earlier in my intro, is that I worked at Twitter for a number of years, almost a decade, becoming a staff engineer, one of only a few that look like me. But I tell you, in terms of skill wise, it was the best job that I've ever had, and definitely some of the brightest engineers I've ever had a chance to work with. Now, this is Twitter 1.0. This is before Elon got there and kicked out the bird and did all that stuff. I have some feedbacks about it in my newsletter, which I'll tell you the link a little bit later. But in general, working at a place like Twitter really gave me a chance to work at scale. Now, scale, what I'm talking about is hyperscale. I'm somebody with backgrounds as a systems engineer. I don't manage just one computer, two computers. I manage thousands and close to hundreds of thousands of computers. As a software engineer, I didn't write code just to develop one single app. I developed and worked on a platform that provided the abstraction layer for everything that ran at Twitter. Now, I may have said some terms there that you may not be familiar with, but that's okay because we're going to dive into it. But the key thing here that I want to emphasize is what is the role of a SRE, and just kind of give you some quick nuggets. So those two skill sets that I talked about, systems engineering and also software engineering, and also a lot of computers. But the role of an SRE is to more or less being kind of like the diplomat in terms of understanding how things work in the coding world, understand how things work in the systems engineering and hardware world, and definitely building reliable systems at scales that the world depends on. Now, one of the cool things that I always like to tell people is that I know how everything works inside of a computer. And if you didn't know, that image on your screen right there is inside of a server. And also, I'm going to mention this so that you know off rip. We all walk around with a computer in our pocket, right? This device here, this is a computer. This computer talks to another computer. Now, imagine how many of these devices we have and how many computers we're going to have for us to be able to communicate, respond, and get those images or tweets as quickly as possible. And just imagine how much infrastructure in terms of servers that have to be available for us to be able to service those connections as fast as we've had in the past. That means we have hundreds of computers, hundreds of thousands of computers. And one thing that I like to illustrate in terms of the environment I worked in is taking a look at what a data center looks like. This is Google's data center here. You'll see that it's kind of racks of computers, and inside those racks, each have a computer in them. Each one of those wires connects to a computer, and when you're talking from your phone or computer to a server, you're more or less connecting to a server. What does that data center look like at Twitter? We've ran a very large, massive infrastructure. And the thing that most people don't realize while I worked at Twitter is that we actually built our own computers. And let me take at least two steps back to kind of calibrate you and so you can, get an idea of what team I worked for. So the team that I worked on was like the AWS, GCP, or Azure of Twitter. So all of the computing resources, I talked about it earlier, abstracted away at the bare metal machine level, at the operating system, application deployment level, is the team that I worked on. And it was called the Compute Platform Team. This is literally like the AWS of Twitter. And that's a team that I became a team lead and definitely have showcased my skill sets as a staff engineer. Now, that's not the only thing that I've done working as a SRE on that team, because I mentioned to you earlier that I had to write code. If there's one thing that I did on a daily basis, and this is something I continue want to encourage you all, is to always be writing code and developing skill sets, right? Developing code and writing code at this very high level isn't something that I picked up until I started to work at Twitter. So just know that it's a journey. You don't have to know it all. Just make sure that you're always learning, right? Always learning. Now, the thing that I really want to dive into is I like to talk about kind of a little bit about Twitter's infrastructure, a little bit of Twitter scale, to kind of get your mind to think about how massive Twitter was, right? And I think it is still massive now. Elon didn't shut it all down because it still works. But if you think about that environment, when I talked about being the AWS of Twitter, we only had a team of about 12 to 18 engineers at a time managing hundreds of thousands of computers around the world. And one of the challenges we had on our team was that whenever someone joined our team, they automatically felt like they were an imposter. They automatically felt like they didn't belong, because this is beyond imaginable. I can't even think about managing and supporting this. So much so that our team really had to spend some time understanding this challenge engineers are having, called imposter syndrome. Now, one of the things that I like to do is really just first of all define what imposter syndrome. Remember, before I'm telling you about like how it was at Twitter and how massive it was, how big it was, some of you all may have been sitting there like, "Oh my gosh, that's a little bit too much for me to even comprehend. Like, what was he talking about inside a computer, or abstracting this and doing that?" And that's the thing, that sometimes when you feel that feeling of feeling like an imposter, those type of questions come into play when you're hearing somebody talking about a technology that you may not be familiar with. What I want to encourage you more or less is not to feel like that. Number one, this journey. There's never been a time that I haven't had to learn something new and always dealing with the unknown. But I had to get comfortable with the idea of feeling like an imposter. But what does I feeling like an imposter feels like? It feels like you're feeling inadequate, um, like your success is based off of luck, and you're fearing of failure. Now, these things, attributes that I'm mentioning, are key for you to develop as an engineer, especially the last one that I mentioned, fearing failure, right? If you don't fail as an engineer, you're not going to develop, right? Don't imagine that you ever write code and the first time you write code, oh, yep, everything is good. I guarantee you, if I write code, as long as I've been doing, it's definitely going to have some syntax errors, especially if it's one of those type languages like Java. That's why I like Python, because I don't got to worry about the semicolon and close brackets and stuff like that. But in general, just know that failing is your way that you're going to develop as an engineer. But people feel this in terms of foundationally feeling that feeling of imposter syndrome. Another thing that it really creates, and this is something that happened in Twitter work environment, working at that scale and working on this team that I'm talking about, is that people got burnt out too quick. People didn't like their job. They were just not satisfied. You go to a stand up, which is a morning meeting that you have on a daily basis where everybody kind of checks in and everybody's down and out, don't really want to be here, kind of checked out. And that's something that really reflects when you're holding that feeling of imposter syndrome that ultimately burns you out from the opportunity. So, one thing that we've dealt with over the years is that we normally have a culture and an environment that we all, will be eventually, you all applying for job opportunities, but those that have been in the industry, of feeling like everybody's always trying to find out who is the imposter, like pointing at each other, like, oh, that person's the imposter, that person's the imposter. And we usually imply that that individual has to get over that feeling of feeling like an imposter, because technically you internalize it. You might not even say much to your peers. You don't even want to tell your manager that you feel like you don't even belong here, right? Because you still want to pay your bills and you got to collect that bag. But in general, that feeling of identifying the imposter has been something that we, working on that team called Compute, really resonated with, because what we found out is that instead of having an individual get over imposter syndrome, it's more or less shifting the focus that the team creates a more inclusive and supportive environment. so that no one feels like they're an imposter, no one feels like they don't belong. Now, this is something that we made a change in our environment after we've had months of people joining our team, branching out to other teams, or leaving Twitter. One of the most difficult things as a leader on a team is when you hire somebody and then all of a sudden they say, "Yeah, I don't think this is for me," and they leave and then they go work for Google and they go work for Amazon. And it's like, yo, what didn't we do to support them in their growth or provide an environment so that they can feel inclusive? And that's where this conversation really foundationally came up. Is like, hey, that feeling initially is something that we have to develop a system around, a practice around, and potentially introduce concepts and strategies that really help individuals get over the feeling of feeling like an imposter. So we're going to step into some of the strategies, but before then, I want to talk about an exercise that we ran at Twitter on the compute team. Now, one of the cool things about this exercise is that when I first joined the team, I was a newbie on the team. I definitely felt like I was out of place. But after going through this exercise, it didn't matter what you told me, I was a part of the crew. I knew everybody. I knew how everybody's position, what position they played. They understood my skill sets. And ultimately, I felt like I was a part of the team. Now, this exercise over the years was evolved into an actual red and blue exercise that turns into one of the foundational things we use to practice when the fire alarm turns on. I'm gonna give you more details to kind of close the loop around the idea itself. But the key thing here is as you're joining teams and becoming engineers yourself, look for opportunity to engage in these type of practices, strategies, or exercises that your team does. And it really foundationally, after you get through the end of this, you'll see why, will really give you this feeling that you belong a part of the team and definitely you kind of brushing off that feeling like an imposter soon afterwards. Now, this exercise that we're talking about is called red and blue. Now, over the years, it kind of evolved. And by the time I left, I was one of the last instructors that kind of ran the exercise working on this team. It's something that we did on a quarterly basis, and especially if we had new interns or new engineers that join our team, because we wanted to run this exercise immediately so that we can get them to feel like they're part of the crew because we didn't want any imposters among us, right? Now, the exercise itself was really revolving around like a war game almost. Now, think about it. Imagine if you're joining a team and we're telling you how massive everything is, how we have hundreds of thousands of this, multiple data centers, you have access to almost shut the world down by accident, right? And we practice. We're practicing those scenarios that have happened before in these war game type events called red and blue. Where we'll have the red team be the team that is breaking everything, burning stuff down, unplugging wires, committing bad code, changing things, disabling things. I mean, they're the mischiefs of the event, right? And then you have the blue team's responsibility is fix the pieces. Now, I know that this sounds kind of like, what are you guys really doing? Or what are y'all really trying to do? And what we're really doing in that process is develop as a skill around new engineers on this team so that they know what to do when the fire alarm turns on and the lights turn off. Remember, the team that I worked on at Twitter is like the AWS or GCP. Now imagine when AWS and GCP goes down, how many applications are affected by it? That's any applications running on top of it. And at Twitter, our infrastructure, we ran about 80 to 90% of all of Twitter on top of our platform. So this practice of running these red and blue exercises is practicing, hey, what would you do if we pull this string or we pull that string or we turn that thing on or we turn that off, right? Is to ultimately have them go through the process of seeing what it feels like. But the resulting effect of this is the part that just it worked like magic every time. Because if you see the blue team, you'll notice the blue team has some really high level engineers at the top of the list. But at the bottom list, you'll see that we have some interns, some first level engineers, another senior engineer. But on the red team, we have really high level staff engineers. And remember, the red teams are more seasoned engineers that know what's going on and they're attacking that system, right? Bringing it down. We're not messing with production, right? We're actually working in a test cluster, test environment, but we're designing in a way that it's very similar so that the same experience you get from one, you get in the other. Now, the idea here is that that blue team is really going to bond because we keep them in a separate room. We kind of are using our terminals, Slack, and Hangout meetings and Zooms to kind of communicate with each other in terms of what things are failing. But the idea is that that blue team actually starts to bond together. And what we found out through this exercise, and I know I can go into more details about the exercise and how it worked, but the key thing is how do we remove that feeling of imposter syndrome? Because when we have that blue team bonding together, when they're in the mud together, they're all working together to fix this. I'll give you an example. If you've ever attended a hackathon, most hackathons, you can do them by yourself, but the ones that are really cool is when you join a group with people that you don't know, and all of a sudden that's a part of your group, or you come to the hackathon with a group of people. But imagine when you all are hacking together, how bonded you all get. Oh man, I have this problem. Oh, I know how to fix this. Yeah. And that's what that we're doing in that process is closing that communication, creating an environment where you feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't know how to do this, but this fire alarm is on. What should I do? And ultimately developing those skills so that by the end of this red and blue exercise, and I tell this story all the time, that I remember one of these interns, I believe it was Mark, the day before, he was one of the most timid, quietest intern we had ever. The day after the red and blue, I promise you, he came into the meeting, the stand-up meeting that we have, put his arm behind his head, kicked his feet up, and said, "Oh man, I can take anything. I can tackle anything after going through this exercise." Right? And I'm like, "Yo, how you be feeling like that after we have the exercise? Yesterday, you didn't have that same energy." And what we started to find out is how much this exercise bonded, but also swiped off that feeling of imposter because now Mark, for this example, he felt like he was a part of the crew. He finally really felt like he can contribute. Now, we're going to break down strategies a little bit more so I can really give you some more details about what the results of this overarching exercise that we've done, but more specifically around the strategy itself. Now, this debug strategy number one that we're going to talk about is embracing individual strengths. So imagine that blue team. You know that there's senior engineers there, but there are some newer engineers that just got here, either interns or first year engineers, right? Is we start to understand what skill sets they have during this exercise. Because the members, at least the senior members of the blue team, have already gone through this exercise before and are looking for key things so that we can bring to light about their diverse skill sets. Because one of the great skills that we really showed during this exercise is that I learned that that person knew a coding language. I didn't know you knew Puppet, which is a configuration coding language. Or I find out, hey, I didn't know that you knew Java like that. You can actually debug the scheduler to help us find out what this issue is, right? And these type of back and forth and collaboration during that exercise, oh my gosh, it empowered them. It empowered the new junior engineer to be like, hey, I actually know some React and I don't know what's going on with this web page, but I'm going to go dive into the logs and look at it, right? And at the end of the day, you start to find out what areas engineers have proficiency in, but also their diverse skill set. And the main point here with this strategy is that you want to acknowledge, support, and recognize their contributions, right? Another strategy that really resonated really well with this exercise is fostering team collaboration. Now, I talked about the exercise, I called it the blue team. What do you think they doing? They hanging together, they're chilling together, they're collaborating together. I want them to be chilling just like this image here, them chilling together trying to solve this problem. Because what that does, it opens up open communication, trust, and safe learning environment. Do you remember when I said, hey, the intern raised their hand and said, hey, I know React and maybe I can go dive into that? Can you imagine if that environment wasn't safe? They may have not even said anything. I guess it's going to be broken. This created an environment that forced people to be teammates, to really understand the value of open communication and then trusting one another. Those are some of the things that when we analyzed the red and blue exercise, we came out with one of these debug strategies. Another debug strategy that was really effective is celebrating. Now, one thing that you may run into, and you may already run into this right now. I mean, I don't know how often you solve a leak code problem. Talking a little sidebar here. Solve a leak code problem here and be like, all right, let me just go to the next one. You don't even celebrate. Or I have mentees or cohorts here at CodePath come and talk to me, and they were like, hey, I got an interview tomorrow with Amazon. What should I do? And I was like, hold on, did you first celebrate that you got an interview with Amazon? Like sometimes we forget the value of celebrating. And that's the cool thing about doing this in an exercise is actually just celebrating the accomplishment, celebrating the recognition, celebrating their achievement. I mean, imagine you being an intern or a first year engineer and you're being celebrated for your skill set by a senior staff engineer, right? That's only going to make you feel like you're more part of the crew, right? And it really just creates an environment where inclusivity is foundational, and it's really showcases how much we appreciate your efforts. Now, these three debug strategies that we went through are really meant for foundationally for us to kind of push down to the team for them to know, like, hey, you're creating this type of inclusive environment. But for this talk specifically, I wanted to give you an idea of how work, in terms of working in an environment where you're collaborating with your peers, can be created in a way that allows you to be more inclusive in that environment. Now, some of you might be like, hey, but I'm just new here. I'm just walking in the door. That part of the talk may not resonate with you. But if you are somebody that can really understand these stories that I'm bringing up and seeing the value behind it, you're going to be looking for that in your next job opportunities. And I really want you to keep an eye or keep this in mind in terms of a mindset of these type of strategies that have been used in the past that really are effective for you to become or not to feel like you're an imposter, but become a part of a team and feel really inclusive, right? Another part of this whole idea of unmasking imposters by debugging everyone's doubt is that leadership has a role and responsibility. Now, this slide really does reflect the idea that managers, directors can kind of get this mindset, and definitely something to carry on in organizations that you will work at. But leadership is what you're really going to be looking for to make these type of foundational, like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to really solve this problem around feeling like imposters or create an inclusive environment. But the thing that I want to close out with this section here in terms of just the leadership role is that you're always looking for examples when you're working at the keyboard. You have a manager, you have a director, and you're always looking to see if they have these type of attributes, right? That they are making these foundational in terms of building the teams and building the infrastructure that you're supporting. Because collaborating and having a collective mindset is key. And it's something that I used to teach younger engineers all the time. And this is kind of like making you really understand why we like to use something like a source control system like Git and publish it out in GitHub, is because the repository, the coding environment, the issues we're working on, the features we're adding, it's a collective mindset. We're doing it all together. And leadership are usually the ones that are help guiding the direction, but we're on the execution side. So this is why when I do this talk in front of leadership, I like to emphasize the values around inclusive environments, but also want to encourage you to look for that in the environments that you will eventually work in, because I guarantee you, you're really going to excel in environments like that. Now, some of the key takeaways, and we're just going to walk through these real quick, is really, I know that most of us feel like getting over imposter syndrome is an individual thing. I'm not telling you not to work on yourself. Definitely work on yourself, believe in yourself. Know that this field of engineering, we deal with unknown unknowns. I've been learning for the past 20 years. Every 3 to 5 years, I have to learn something new. I promise you, get used to not knowing. Get used to feeling like, oh my gosh, nobody else knows really how this works, but that's all right. Right. The other thing is that just realize that somebody that's been in the industry since 2002, how many rooms I was the only person in, or how many rooms I was the only one that sound like this, or move like this, dress like this, have this, little bit of drip, But at the end of the day, I knew that me as an individual, I was confident in myself, and people would see the skills, and ultimately creating spaces like the one I mentioned at Twitter was something that really allowed me to flourish. But the real foundation to my talk is shifting the conversations from individuals. I want you to work on yourself, but having environments where they can be included and feeling like they're not an imposter, but a part of the crew. Another key takeaway is embracing individual strengths, fostering collaboration, and building bridges. This is more or less, thinking about the team environment, right? You want to be working in an environment where they will be looking at your strengths and really just fostering this idea of collaboration, because we work in a collective mindset. And then leadership's role and responsibility always has to be acknowledged, because we are working in this one direction, a collective mindset, and we have to be led in a way that really reflects the environments we want to work in. All right. So we are coming down to the end of my talk, and look at what the crew looks like now. I mean, everybody feels empowered. And definitely hope my son enjoys these characters that I've stole from him. So he probably want to get credit for it. The last thing I want to tell you before we open it up for questions, it looks like we got at least 10 more minutes left, is that I run a weekly newsletter. I talk about engineering, technology, and the culture and how it intersects. I really do enjoy giving my knowledge and really just diving deep into really, tough conversations based on my experience. I've been around the block a few times. I'm not new to this. And when people come and meet me and they have a chance to really hear me reflect, they're just blown out of their mind about my opinions about certain things because it's really foundationally off of years of experience. And the newsletter is really going to be rocking that way. It's myself. I have two other writers. It's D Hustle. And then my cousin, his name is Don't Call Him Ray Ray. Definitely check us out. We publish on a weekly basis and want to encourage you to reach out through that medium. Now, if you're looking for a link, I didn't really put a barcode here or nothing like that. Check out the Tech Hustle website. It's a very simple website. Check out the blog posts or newsletters that we post. If you're looking for my LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter accounts, scroll to the bottom. Definitely link up. And let me tell you, if somebody tells you to connect, connect. Don't be afraid to connect because you might be catching gems. And I heard Sheena Allen mention earlier a different way for you to reach out to mentees or mentors and stuff like that. So definitely use these tools to their full potential. And that's all that I have for y'all. I really appreciate the time and definitely want to open it up for questions. I don't have a list of what questions we have here, but let me see. We might be able to bring someone up on stage if they want, and definitely want to encourage any questions that y'all may have based on the context that I gave.
Yeah, Bobby, I'm going to drop one to you in the speaker chat if you want to answer that while we get some people to raise their hands. But that's a question that someone asked earlier in the session. And then for everyone else, if you use the raise hand feature, we'll see your raised hand and we'll be able to invite you up to the stage to ask Bobby your question live.
Oh, for sure. I'm gonna read off the question. The question says, "What is the inspiration or driving force that fuels you to overcome all the challenges and tough situations?" Wow, that is a really good question, and I'm gonna get a little not philosophical, but I'm really gonna hopefully inspire you to get this type of focus. The thing is that I've been working in the field of engineering for more than 20 years now. And over the years, I've worked in a lot of environments where I don't see anybody that looks like me. It's slim to none. I can remember working at Twitter in 2013. There was only 5 Black engineers there, count on my hand. And it really just causes me to really question what my value system is when I don't see people that look like me and opportunities and positions that I know for a fact, hands down, y'all can kill it. And that's a lot of things that I really want to convey. And my ultimate goal and what really fuels me is making this impact to the next generation to let you know you got it. So what really, fuels me is the potential for what y'all can achieve. Like I reach for stars and I tell people all the time, right? Remember, I'm a global motivational speaker, so I'm gonna drop a few lines or two. But I remember a mentee of mine was telling me that she was like, "The sky's the limit." And I was like, "The skies are not the limit. The stars are." And the cool thing about stars is that when you reach for them, they go farther. So keep reaching. And for me, I'm always reaching to make sure I show you all what you can be and what you can achieve, especially if I started from bottom. So that's the thing that really fuels me is the potential impact that you all can have because y'all the next generation that's coming up in engineering. I can't keep doing this for another 20 years. I mean, I could, I love being at the keyboard and I stayed away for a little bit, but staying away for a little bit. And I seen somebody threw out my GitHub project that's coming out. Yeah, the Tech Hustle has a GitHub project out there. Follow along. We're really trying to make some changes. But in general, really, my impact and the thing that really fuels me is my impact to this generation that's coming up. Because I see the potential. I know that's there. And the industry is ever evolving. Sometimes I just got to remind you of the great things that you do so that can continue to push you. So hopefully that gives you an answer to your question. All right. All right, we got another question from Dan. All right, it says, "How should one deal with imposter syndrome when being compared with other people who happen to be better?" Ooh. Now, the thing that I always tell people is that don't compare anybody with you. You only compare yourself with yourself. You compare yourself with yesterday, right? The thing that you don't want to get caught up in life is comparing yourself with people. It's all right to compete, definitely, but comparing yourself in the sense of, man, they're able to do that, man, because I can't do that, there must be something wrong with me. Rather than they can do that, guess what? I bet you I could do it better, right? Is ultimately making sure that you're not setting yourself up for failure when you more or less notate that you're comparing yourself to someone, because you will feel like an imposter, because there are always going to be somebody better than you. My pops used to tell me this all the time, and this is the crazy thing. As I get older, I kind of always reflect on conversations that me and my dad had. He's probably one of the smartest people I've ever known. And big shout outs to him and my mom. They've been together for 40 plus years now. But in general, my pops always told me that no matter what field you get in, there's going to be somebody better than you. You're going to meet somebody that took it to the next level. And he says all that is a mile marker for you to work towards. And when you run into that person, you run at their same pace. And then I guarantee you, you're going to pass them, because mindset wise, I'm using you to get to the level that I want to get to, because I can see myself at that level. And the way that he described it to me is not to use that as a way to hold me back, but it's use it as a way to motivate me, to push me, and inspire me. And if I could tell you something, one of the things that I always give advice on, especially when you're in the work environment, and a lot of people like, yo, how can you start from the help desk and end up working for Twitter? It's because I kept climbing, I kept pushing myself. I didn't allow myself to feel like I'm less than, even if the next person to me were better than me. Because I guarantee you, give me about a month or two, they're gonna be in my dust type stuff. So that's the mindset shift that I hope I give you, and definitely want to inspire you to keep focusing on yourself and don't compare yourself to others. Yeah, just check yourself from yesterday. Do better than what you did yesterday. All right. What does an SRE do exactly is the next question that's been shifted over. All right. So what is an SRE? So the way that I like to describe SRE, and sorry I didn't get into much details at the talk, but I'm trying to get through the slides so I can inspire you, but I'm going to give you something. All right. So SREs as a concept was originally created by Google. And the idea is that SREs are going to be software engineers that write code to manage hardware and systems, and/or systems engineers that are going to write software to manage hardware and systems. Now that might not make sense to you, but the foundational thing is that one of the practices that Google introduced by introducing the world to SRE is that you can have multiple skills that is focusing on the reliability of the overall site, right? You could be a software engineer building software and building systems, and or systems engineer building software to manage systems. But foundationally, we are all focused on reliability. Keyword, site reliability engineer. My role as a site reliability engineer was to make sure that the site was up 99.999% of the time, maybe 5, 10 nines. I wish it was 10 nines, but in general, if it went down, my skill sets were the ones that they leaned on to bring the site back up. It is labeled different things. I believe Meta and Facebook calls it production engineers. You might hear other people refer to it as like DevOps engineers. Those are very similar, but two different paths. And foundationally, just think of it. I am a diplomat for the run of services. If the run of services go down, they call me. And my skill sets are what we lean on to more or less develop ways to solve that challenge that we're having when we're not meeting those specific requirements for our customers. That's what a site reliability engineer does. And yeah, we do some really cool stuff, from writing code to automate ourselves out of a job, dealing with toil, which is a term that you may get familiar with, especially when you start to get in the industry, when you're doing things repetitive. And this concept, hey, if you do it more than once, then you need to write some code. But in general, just really just taking software engineering practices and managing infrastructure at hyperscale. Hopefully that gives you an answer. And definitely feel free to reach out if you want some more context. And I have an article or two out there if you check out on the Tech Hustle site around site reliability engineering. All right. So the next question, you coming up, Dana?
I've just been dropping them in the chat, if that's okay. No one's raised their hand so far, so I can just
No
keep
worries, no worries. I see a few claps. Looks like everybody has some good response to my feedback. Let's see what the next question is. It says, what resources would you use to improve your skills that worked for you? All right. What resources? So I started back in 2002. This was actually before Google was Google, and before we had access to Wikipedia and the internet as of it is today. The library used to be my resource. I used to have to read reference manuals. I used to take computers apart and not know what that jumper does and had to go search for some IBM manuals to figure out what that jumper does. That's the old days. Now, y'all, this time I don't want to hear no excuses because you have at the tip of your finger this thing right here. I didn't have this when I was coming up. This is a computer. It has something called the internet on there. I know y'all know what that is. I know y'all know what Google is. I also know y'all know what Stack Overflow is. All of those same tools you use to figure out your problems and develop your skills are the same ones that I use as an engineer on a daily basis, right? And my main thing here is that I want you to be okay with number one, not finding it on the first attempt. You put in a Google search, I didn't find it. I'm not gonna. You got to develop that skill of research, diving deeper, right? The other thing I want you to get used to is reading manuals. A lot of people, when they're like, "Hey, I'm trying to learn a programming language. I want to go to this program to go learn it," and I was like, "Hey, did you ever go to Python's website and read Python's documentation, or GitHub and go read GitHub's documentation, or Java and just learn about the JVM and like read the documentation?" Is use the resources that you have available to you and don't just want things handed to you. I'm not trying to bash anybody, but I want you to develop this skill set because this is what's going to take you to the next level as an engineer. Because what made me most proficient is that I always dived a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper. All right, so it's like, hey, the operating system works like this. All right, but how does the kernel work? All right, go down to the kernel level. All right, those have some called system calls, APIs. How does that work? And keep diving deeper and deeper. I really want to encourage you all to build that as a practice in terms of mindset, and I promise you, these resources that you already have access to, which is called the internet, you can answer anything and learn anything. The last thing I want to drop in terms of insights into this is that you also have different mediums for you to be able to access this information. Don't feel like because you're on YouTube, you're not getting the information because you are, right? Sometimes you need hands on eye examples for you to see how this thing works, is to use all of the resources to your best abilities. Just remember, don't get caught up on all that advertising stuff. We use the internet for what the internet was created for, access to information, and definitely want to encourage you to keep pushing. All right. All right. And I guess, are we getting close to the end, Dana? Let me see how many more questions we have here. Oh, I like this one before you come up. It says, if you had to restart your career, would you do anything different knowing what you know now, especially in regards to the mindset imposter syndrome? Oh, that is a nice one. All right. So if I had a chance to do it again, I'm going to be straight up with you. They might cut this part out of the whole thing. Uh, Supplemental education is something that I want to encourage you all to continue to pursue. You're at CodePath for that reason. You're not going to get everything at your university. So if I were to do this again, I would lean even more on the free supplemental education that you have from CodePath courses like such, certifications that all of these companies are offering, and definitely contributing to a space that I know you all are familiar with, which is called open source. Now, I really want to make sure I lean on the open source side, especially most of you probably leaning on software engineering skill sets. But if you ever wanted to develop skills as an engineer and see what it is to feel like you're an engineer, subscribe to some of these open source projects, become members. You don't have to contribute out the gate. Follow along. Watch how they conduct their meetings, how features are being developed, how pull request works, how code is being changed, reading other people's code, understanding the entry points of the code all the way through. Like, if I were to do it all over again, I'll be on GitHub every day looking for projects to contribute to, working on certifications, and then leveling up on skill sets that I don't have proficiency based on job positions that I'm interested in. I'm not sure if I would be at school, but I'm going to leave that one on the table. Just know that regardless of your decision, supplemental education is how you're going to get ahead of your peers. That'll be my recommendation. All right. Any other questions? Let me see. We have a raised hand too. It looks like we may have somebody raise their hand. Can we bring them up on stage? Yellow.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, it can.
Okay, so considering the remarkable achievements and progress your company has made so far, what strategic vision do you have for the future and how do you envision shaping the company's tomorrow?
Wow, that's a really good question. So, and I just want to make sure we're on the same page. You're talking about the achievements that Tech Hustle has had so far and where we're taking the Tech Hustle to the next level. Is that right? Yes, no, maybe so.
Oh, sorry, my mic was unmuted.
No
Yes.
worries. All right, awesome. So the Tech Hustle. So I have this a meme that I've been, giving me perspective of where I want to take the Tech Hustle. And hopefully I don't sound too ambitious because I like to poke my chest out a little bit sometime. But I'm starting off the Tech Hustle as a place where we're really building up community in terms of teaching the next generation about technology engineering, teaching skill sets, specifically around the skill sets I've developed, like as systems engineering from Linux, command line, Git, Python, and those programming languages. But my ultimate goal is to redesign, let me rephrase that, is to develop a platform similar to what we ran at Twitter. So I have a project that I'm working on. Definitely check out my GitHub. It's called Muppy. And Muppy has the ability to run anything on any coding language anywhere in the world. And if that's something that I'm really working towards, is eventually developing Muppy into a multi-billion-dollar company, and the people that join my community are going to be the ones that are going to help me write this code. So in general, I am really looking for opportunities to collaborate with all of you all, especially in open source space, so that we can all benefit from the skill sets that we'll develop, relationships and networks, but ultimately find a way to contribute to a platform that could be something that you're running in your workspace and/or at a company called the Tech Hustle. So I have a North Star that I'm shooting towards. Follow along. I will definitely be talking more about these things inside the newsletter, but really appreciate you asking that question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So let me know where we at. And for some reason, and y'all don't know how blessed we are right now, this whole time my laptop's power has been unplugged and it just alerted me that it had 2% left because I turned off all my notifications and I just seen the power button. So I just clicked back on. So we good. We good. No worries at all. We have a question about how to access the newsletter. The techhustle.com, if you go to that website, you'll see links to subscribe. You also see links to one of our publications that was written a few months ago around when Elon Musk changed the name of Twitter to X. And I'm giving some of my feedback. But in general, that's the easiest way to subscribe to the newsletter and definitely follow along there. All right. So the last question that we have is, looks like we don't have any more raising hands. This is how. Let's see if we can do a raise of hand question. If anybody has their hand raised and/or wants to come up on stage and say what's up, I don't bite. I definitely want to motivate you, encourage you. Oh, look at Robertson Robert. Oh, that's my guy. What's going on, player?
Going pretty good, pretty good. Hopefully you're doing well as well.
Yes,
My
sir,
question
man.
was in terms of, uh, being a employee to starting your own business and pretty much being a founder. What's the hardest part? Because sometimes you have ideas like, oh, I would like to create an application and having my own mobile application or being a founder, creating something. I would say, what's the hardest first step to do? Right? Because obviously you're not raising money yet or anything yet, but what's the hardest first step?
Yeah, I mean, that keynote we had today, earlier today, by Sheena Allen, really was inspiring to me because it also made me really think about my journey as an engineer. Because I'm one of those that has the ability to create just about anything, but I don't know what I want to create. There's so many things that I want to create. I always give advice to my mentees about this idea of going down a path of entrepreneurship. Number one, Pepsi don't care that Coca-Cola exists. They just made a better product, right? Just keep that in mind. Don't feel like, hey, just because somebody else already built it, that you can't build it. Number two, solve a problem. Don't just be like, hey, I just want to make this thing look prettier. Solve an actual problem, right? If you define what the problem is and you solve it, guess what? You might not be the only one that has this problem. Specific keynote speech, Sheena Allen, banking in her rural area she lived was a problem. She solved it, and it wasn't just her area, but there were areas around her. Those are like foundationally mindset things that I feel like you all should be considering, especially if you're pursuing the idea of an entrepreneurship. Another thing that I want you to be okay with is just knowing that it's a journey, right? One of the cool things working at a place like Twitter, oh my gosh, you should know how many innovators I ran into or entrepreneurs, people that I used to sit right next to me, gone off and build, multiple $100,000 company, $100 million company. Like it blows my mind that their mindset was there. They were just sitting in the background, watching, learning, creating, right? And that was the thing about going into the workforce is that don't miss out on the opportunity to develop skills that you need when you're running a business around people management, task management, scoping projects, knowing when, hey, yeah, we're not going to really do that. We need to pull back, right? These are things that you're going to learn not just as an entrepreneur. You're going to learn the hard way, or you can work in an environment and learn in a safe environment where you're still getting paid, but you're still putting that in your bag of assets. So definitely take advantage of those opportunities. And if any advice that I have is just pursue things that you're most passionate about, right? Something that really resonates with you because you're going to spend long hours, long days, and you're not gonna get paid out the gate. You're not gonna, them checks ain't gonna be coming through. You're gonna be scratching, trying to find reasons to, for me, telling my wife that I don't want to go get a job because I still want to ride this tech hustle thing out, right? So in general, just be prepared for that, but it has to be something you're passionate about, and/or you're gonna iterate yourself out. So I want to encourage you, keep your eyes open, keep your ears to the streets, and keep pushing. All right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Roger that. All right. All right. I think we are at the end. I've been having a really good time. I think some music's been playing in the background. Y'all can hear the music? Oh, yeah, yeah, it's coming through. All right, Dana, I think we are at the end, or do we have any more questions?
I think we are all out of questions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop the survey link in the chat. Please fill that out. Show some love to Bobby in the chat for dropping gems for us over the last hour. You can drop some emojis too to show him some love. And please, please, please fill out that survey. And there's still an opportunity to engage in some general networking. You can go through other sessions, check your schedule for tomorrow, and let us know if you have any questions on the Slack channels. Thank you so much, Bobby, for sharing what you shared with us today.
Roger that. I really want to just close out with one thing and more or less just show appreciation to everybody that stuck around, hanging out with me. I quickly was going through some of the chats. Y'all really are inspiring me just by lifting me up and acknowledging me. So I really do appreciate you. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, because it was an announcement that I didn't get a chance to put a slide in there, but in 2024, the Tech Hustle is going on a nationwide tour. We're going to colleges, campuses, and cities around the country, speaking to the next generation about the skill set that I've developed over the years, and definitely want to see all of you. So definitely hit me up on the techhustle.com. Subscribe to the newsletter so you can get some more information because I want to pull up. But in general, thank you all so much. Holla at your boy is Bobby D.